Hi, I'm Jeff Stark. This is the second of a series of videos that we have titled Addictions. They are going to be very short videos addressing the problem of people who are struggling and failing with addictions. They're going to be short. They're probably going to be videos that are 5 or 6 or 7 minutes long, not long and not comprehensive, but short, but nonetheless extremely vital truth passed along in these videos that are essential to know and to understand and implement in order for a person to be set free from their addictions. If you're looking for a more comprehensive way to study addictions, I would highly recommend one more time that you buy a book called Addictions, A Banquet in a Grave. The author's name is Edward Welch, W-E-L-C-H, and I'm very confident that you'll find that a very helpful resource that's much, much more comprehensive than what we're going to be doing through these many short videos. Video number 1 addressed the problem as to giving an explanation as to why people, a person, a man or a woman, might be addicted to a particular addiction, but struggling with it for many years and sometimes decades and highly, highly frustrated on not being able to stop. Video number 1 offered a very possible explanation as to why, despite the fact that you've put in decades of work to overcome that addiction, you haven't been able to. You'll want to look at video number 1 in that mindset in terms of giving you probably an explanation as to why, despite your effort, you've not been able to be set free. I'd like to do that in the second video here today, and I'm going to do it by talking to you about temptation and the various strategies that people have in terms of how to overcome addictions and why it's so frustrating, offering you an explanation as to why it may be so frustrating that you haven't been able to. So let's do it this way. Oftentimes, men and women who struggle with addictions have 3 categories of how to deal with temptation. On this over here, there's yes, I'm tempted and I'm going to jump in, and with our temptation is going to be pornography that we're going to be talking about today. One way of responding to temptation is say, yes, I'm going to go down in the basement and turn on my computer and I'm going to do my porn. Another way of dealing with temptation is to say no, which is over here on the other side. And that's, I'm tempted, but I'm not going to do pornography tonight, and so I'm going to walk away from that and not do it. But very, very, very frequently, there is a third category of where a person might say, who's tempted, but might say maybe. Or in other words, I might do it, I might not, maybe I will, maybe I won't, I'm not sure, I haven't made up my mind, I'm really on the fence and I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. Now, what I have found is that if an addict has these 3 categories as their stratagem, so to speak, their strategies of dealing with temptation, then they're going to fail. And I'll explain to you why right now. Because I believe that the Bible gives us 2 ways that we deal with temptation, and one is saying yes, and one is saying no. But you'll notice that maybe is really in the yes category, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. Over here in the no category, we have 2 passages. One is Colossians chapter 3, verse 5, which says this: whatever belongs to your earthly, sinful nature, put it to death. Now that's violent behavior, isn't it? What it says, if you struggle with an addiction of pornography, for example, then as you are tempted, you are to put it to death. And that's very violent and very ruthless behavior. Put it to death means murder it. Don't put it in a closet. Don't put it in a cage. No. Murder it and put it to death, and do it very, very quickly. Titus chapter 2, verse 12 says this: for the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. God's grace teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled lives as we wait for the Lord to return. Titus says that we ought to say no to it definitively, clearly, irrevocably, irreversibly, no, definitively no. when we're dealing with our temptations. But you'll notice over here there's a maybe. Now, when you say yes, so let's look at this experientially. What happens when you say yes? Your wife's asleep, kids asleep, you're alone, you're tempted to do pornography, and you're in the yes category. Well, that temptation is going to get stronger, and the feelings and the desires are going to get stronger, and boom, you're downstairs turning on your computer and looking at pornography because the desires have just grown so intense. You've said yes. You're in the yes category. You've already consented to it. There's no resistance to it. You're going to go do it. Now, what happens if you're in your house and your wife is asleep and you're tempted to do temptation, but you say no? Absolutely not. And you put it to death, and you continue to put it to death, and you're murderous about it. You're ruthless about it. You're saying no, and you're fleeing. You're putting it to death. What happens to the temptation? Well, the temptation goes away. And very importantly, when you're ruthless and violent and saying no, and you're putting it to death, and you're murdering that as a possibility, the desires quickly go away as well. Isn't that amazing? Now, so yes, temptations grow, desires grow, and you already consent. But if you're saying no and you're not consenting and you're putting it to death, then the temptation goes away and the desires go away. Two very different strategies. But what happens when you say maybe? I'm not sure, I'm on the fence, I haven't really made up my mind. What I think will happen to you is what happened to me, and I think this is what happens in general, and that is if I'm in the maybe category, the temptation continues to grow and the desires continue to grow. So what does that mean? If that's true, then what that means is maybe is really yes. Experientially, temptations grow in the yes, they grow in the maybe, and in the yes, the desires grow. And when you're in the maybe, it also grows as well. And so it's very helpful to understand that this middle ground, you might be commending yourself because you're not saying yes. I'm not saying yes. I haven't made up my mind. That's a good place to be, but it really isn't. Maybe is really yes. And it certainly means, secondly, that you're not implementing the strategy that the Holy Spirit will use to set you free from this addiction. And the strategy is no. Put it to death. Murder it. Flee from it. Have nothing to do with it. Okay? Maybe is really yes. So you're not in a position of strength and commendation. It really is a yes, and so you may be thinking that you're in a better place because you're not saying yes. You haven't quite said no, but you're not saying yes, but actually maybe is a yes. You respond to it in the same way with the temptation level and the desire level, and I would guarantee that 99% of the time that you're in that maybe category, you're going to fall back into the yes, and that's why I put it in the yes category. As you examine your experience, be honest with yourself. If you have a category that's maybe, assess how often that when you're in that category, you actually end up doing what your addiction compels you to do. And I think you're going to find that it's 99% of the time, if not 100% of the time. I hope that offers you an explanation as to why you have struggled and failed for so many years. And that is, if you have a maybe category, well, that's a yes. And though you may be thinking you're in a good category because you're not saying no, you're not saying yes, but in actuality and experientially, you really are. I hope that offers you an explanation as to why you've just continued to fail and have been very, very frustrated at having done so. I hope that helps offer an explanation as to why you've continued to fail. Stay tuned for more videos that will hopefully give you continued truth and explanations on not only why you're failing, but certainly strategies on how to be set free from this. See you next time.